Hey everybody, welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe, Mary Kay Cabot, Ashley Bastock here on a Monday, talking all things. We're going to talk quarterbacks here. We love talking quarterbacks on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Of course, we had a big free agency week last week. We had a lot of Myles Garrett content. So if you missed anything that we put up last week on our feed, go back and listen to all of that stuff, including the pod that went up on Saturday when we reacted to Myles Garrett's press conference. But today we're going to sort of reset where things stand at quarterback. And it's a good day to do it, Mary Kay, because Jameis Winston has a visit. Jameis Winston is, I always find it interesting the way people talk about Jameis and kind of, especially the hardcore Jameis fans, the Florida State fans, people who absolutely love Jameis Winston. We, of course, have discussed about why it didn't work out here, why the Browns ultimately decided to bench him, and give Dorian Thompson-Robinson a shot. Maybe there was a little sort of pseudo tanking in there, but they obviously were done with Jameis Winston once he started turning the football over a little bit. What's the latest here on the quarterback position? How does just Jameis visiting the Giants, who of course are one of the teams in the Russell Wilson sweepstakes as well, how does Jameis Winston visiting the Giants impact the Browns quarterback plans right now?
Well, there are four pretty good bridge quarterbacks still out there on the market, or starting quarterbacks out there on the market in that veteran market. And they are Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Joe Flacco, and Jameis Winston. Pretty much everybody else is gone when we're talking about that level of experience. Guys that have won a lot of football games, played a lot of football games, and in some cases had tremendous success doing it. So those are the four guys that are still out there. Now, the way that Jameis's visit to the New York Giants impacts the Cleveland Browns is the fact that they've already had Russell Wilson in for a visit. We already know that they're very interested in Aaron Rodgers and waiting word on him, and they've already had Joe Flacco in for a visit. Flacco and Russell Wilson were both in last week for their visits with the Giants. So we know that Russell was here on Thursday, that he went up to New York, visited with the Giants that night, and spent Friday with them as well. So what's happening right now is everyone's kind of waiting to see what is going to happen with Aaron Rodgers. Who does he decide to sign with? Is it going to be the Giants? Is it going to be the Steelers? Is it going to be the Vikings? There is some talk and there are some reports out there that he would really like to play for Kevin O'Connell. Who wouldn't? Look what he did with Sam Darnold last year. It's just a very quarterback friendly offense. You've got Justin Jefferson up there. These guys know how to deal with quarterbacks and help them to look really good. And I think that's one thing that Aaron Rodgers really could use right now, although they have J.J. McCarthy, their draft pick, their first-round draft pick from last year. So he's coming off of an injury, and they, of course, don't know exactly how that's going to go. And so they want to hedge their bets with that a little bit, the Vikings do. So the way, again, that this impacts the Browns is if Aaron signs with the Giants, it leaves Russell and Joe available to the Cleveland Browns. If Russell signs with the Giants, it kind of only leaves Joe for the Browns. So that's the way this is going to go, in part because they are not interested in re-signing Jameis Winston. The writing was on the wall when he was benched last year. Once he was benched, that was basically it, even though he would like to come back here. And I wouldn't completely 100% rule it out, but it really doesn't seem to be in the cards right now. I think that they would go with Joe over Jameis. I know they would go with Joe over Jameis. It was just a feel-good year with Joe Flacco, of course, until they got to the playoff game. 4-1 record, 300-yard average and all that kind of thing. So we'll see how it goes, but basically that's what's happening. If the Giants end up signing Russell, then it really leaves the Browns kind of almost down to Joe.
And that's interesting. I mean, Joe is like, just from a Browns fan perspective and the Browns perspective, Joe's kind of an easy win. It would be a very popular signing. Fans would be excited. You could still have a rookie that you could start eventually when, once, fans would kind of know, I think, the deal with Joe Flacco and a potential rookie. The guy's 40 years old. But it's kind of going back to what you did a few years ago. I don't know how everyone feels about that, but I think Browns fans would certainly find that popular. Ashley, it just sort of feels like the Browns at least for now, and maybe it's not completely their choice, but they're sort of content to let things sort of play out elsewhere and then make their decision.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. We talked a little bit about this last week, but I think it's okay if you don't necessarily have the full picture with a veteran in line like tomorrow, right? I think you can kind of see how things play out in the draft. Now, they're going to need to add multiple people to that room, obviously via the draft. And then one of these two veterans, it seems like we're narrowed down to now. And I think it's okay to let the market kind of play out. And I mean, obviously, too, we've talked about this. Like, how is the Aaron Rodgers decision going to impact Russ, going to impact Flacco? And obviously, the Browns, are not really in the mix there, but it's the biggest domino that still has yet to fall in terms of the veteran quarterbacks.
Okay, so a name we didn't mention because obviously there was news about him over the weekend, and that was Kirk Cousins. And that is, as expected, Mary Kay, the Falcons did decide to hang on to Kirk Cousins for now. That deadline passed for that $10 million to become guaranteed. So he is an Atlanta Falcon, as we all expected. You'd been writing about it for a while. There is still the possibility that he could be made available via trade. Now, I think Kirk Cousins as a free agent is different than, hey, we're going to give up some assets for Kirk Cousins, and then it's probably going to cost more money too because you're taking on at least part of that contract, however you would work that out. But is that still in play at all for the Browns? That between, I mean, you'd probably have to wait till after the draft, but is it still in play that the Browns could get to a point where maybe they would say, yeah, we'll give up, I mean, I don't even know what it would cost. We'll give up something to bring Kirk Cousins in.
I don't think it's going to be in play, given that they would probably have to give up draft capital. It seems to me, especially if this happens after the draft, by that point, I believe the Browns will have. I'm just going to stick with Shedeur Sanders for right now. I mean, I don't want to overthink this thing and then all of a sudden at the last minute in the run up to the draft go away from what seems to be the obvious choice for them if the Titans take Cam Ward, right? So instead of going all over the road with everything else, I'm just going to stick with Shedeur Sanders for now until I come to the conclusion that they just don't feel that strongly about him. So for all intents and purposes, by that point, they'll probably have Shedeur Sanders on their roster or could have Shedeur Sanders on their roster. And if you think you're going to start the number 2 overall pick in the draft, you're not going to give up a significant draft pick for Kirk Cousins. But there might be a team or two that really needs a Kirk Cousins. Or maybe the Falcons wait a little bit until someone gets desperate enough to give them a pretty high pick for Kirk Cousins. And of course, he has a no trade clause in his contract. But if you can get a pretty high draft pick or a nice little haul for him when someone needs a starter, then you can make up some of that $37.5 million that you're having to spend on him this year. So I don't know that the Browns are going to be in that market anymore for Kirk Cousins. I think he was on the radar very much so when it really seemed as though the Falcons were just going to release him, not pay him the bonus, and not not try to keep him around at that price point. But everything has changed. They're willing at this point, if you're going to be paying him, if you have that on the books, 27.5 before the bonus, you're going to have that on the books. Why not keep him around as your backup? And if something happens with Michael Penix, your number 8 overall pick from last year, you're good to go. What's it going to look like to Falcons fans if they just let him go and they're paying him all that money and he's not on their roster? That would be silly for them to do that. But if they get draft compensation in return that helps them going forward, and we know that Terry Fontenot at the NFL Combine basically said, we are going to do whatever is best for the Falcons. So if they can parlay this whole thing into some good draft capital, they will do that.
Yeah, and I don't know how much leverage Kirk actually has. I mean, he's obviously getting older. I don't know that he could sit here and demand a trade and say, "Well, I'm going to sit out games." Like, first of all, you're not the starting quarterback anyway, but also, like, I don't think teams are going to be banging down the door to go get Kirk Cousins if he demanded his way out. Now, I do think that, like that scenario you mentioned, if somebody gets hurt or if a team kind of gets into camp and is like, oh, maybe we don't love our quarterback situation as much as we thought, or this rookie quarterback's not as ready as we thought he'd be, whatever it is, that increases his value. But I'm sort of in the camp, Ashley, where it's like, Kirk Cousins wasn't at the top of my list, but I care a lot less about Jimmy Haslam's money than I do about actually giving up draft capital to get a guy like Kirk Cousins. I just don't think that, especially if you are drafting a quarterback at 2, whether it's Shador or even if you take Jackson Dart later in the first round, whatever it is, if you're drafting a guy that high in the draft, I don't want to give up draft assets for a guy that I'm just planning to replace before the season's over anyway.
Exactly, and I think that is the issue with Kirk Cousins. Like, he's not, if the Browns were to go after him, he would not be the long-term solution at quarterback. This would essentially be another veteran bridge guy. So why are you dipping into your future to acquire somebody like that? It just doesn't make sense, especially when there are a couple of guys available who are obviously very much on their radar in Russ and Joe Flacco. And I mean, that's even me saying it. I was more of a fan of the Kirk Cousins idea than you were, Dan. And even I'm like, yeah, no, like if they're going to be intent on only trading him and getting future draft assets, you just need to bow out at that point, because Kirk Cousins' age, obviously, he's just not a QB of the future for this team at this stage of his career. So I don't think you can get into that kind of waiting game and expect it's going to change, because I mean, as Mary Kay's laid out, with the money situation there, Atlanta, if they are eventually going to move him, seems pretty intent on getting something from that move and not just letting him go and letting bygones be bygones. The business aspect of this all is hanging over any future Kirk move.
And I think too, Mary Kay, the lack of desperation here by the Browns, kind of just still, it all points to like whoever they get this year is obviously just a placeholder. And people might hear that and be like, yeah, of course, Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, Joe Flacco, of course they're placeholders. But like, my point is, like, it's all just pointing to they are going to draft someone. Again, it feels like I'm kind of with you. It feels like Shador Sanders would be the safest bet at number 2, but maybe it's Jackson Dart. I mean, I just saw a mock draft from PFF today that had Jackson Dart going 3. So that's going to start to build this idea that maybe you take Jackson Dart that high. Or maybe you trade back and you take Jackson Dart, like whatever it is. Maybe there's somebody else you like in this draft. Maybe you really like Tyler Shuck, somebody like that. But this all points to the Browns trying to find their long-term starter in this draft, probably at number 2.
Right. And speaking of Tyler Shuck, he is a name that I keep hearing just darting, no pun intended, darting up draft boards. And at this point, I would not be surprised if he goes in the first round. And who knows? Maybe maybe this is the trick they have up their sleeve. Maybe they like him enough to trade back in the first round and try to take him or something like that. I don't know. Like I said, I don't want to get myself going in so many circles that I go away from Shador Sanders. So I have to keep pulling myself back. Every time I hear something, I keep pulling myself back to the thing that we have thought for a long, long time. And the other thing about the fact that I still think that they're probably going to go quarterback at number 2, there isn't a sense of urgency to go out and get a veteran quarterback. They let all of these veteran quarterbacks fly off the shelves, one after the other. And I know there were some that they pursued, Daniel Jones and some of the others that weren't going to completely 100% break the bank. But the fact that they still don't have one at this point, and that they're completely 100% willing to end up with Joe Flacco, if it turns out that way, that says to me that they're going to start a rookie quarterback maybe in week 1. And if they're planning to do that, it's probably Shador Sanders. How many times have we heard his dad, Dion, say that he's the most ready to step in and lead a football team right now, that he's ready for the moment? So it just seems to me that Shador is the game. Shador is the plan. And I don't know. I just feel that way because would you have let Russ get out of the building if you really felt that you needed him to start for you this year? I wouldn't have, unless you're like desperate and worried about who's going to start for you. I don't know. It just seems to me that all signs are pointing to your rookie quarterback of the future getting that starting experience this year and getting ready to maybe take the team to the next level next year.
So I do want to ask this about Shador. Are you saying that with the assumption that Cam Ward is gone? I'm just
Yes,
curious.
100%.
Okay. I'm just
Yes,
curious.
100%. Because I think I still, and again, I still have to do film study and talking to people more than I have to this point. I have done some, but I want to do more diligence on these guys. But in this moment in time, I think I probably would go Cam Ward if the Browns had their choice of both. I don't think they're going to have their choice of both guys. I really do think that Cam is going to go number one. If the Titans are smart, they'll take him themselves. If not, then the Giants or somebody are going to go grab him. So I don't see that happening for the Browns. And it also tells me that maybe they do believe that Shador is the better quarterback for them. Because if they didn't feel that way, they would be knocking on the Titans' door. Or maybe they just believe the Titans are taking him. But yes, all of that is predicated on Cam Ward being gone.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of where I'm at too, is just this idea, because I feel like if Cam Ward were there too, I would take him. But if it's Shador, I'm hedging a little bit on Shador versus Jackson Dart, but that's just because I'm overthinking it. Because I do agree with you. At some point, you have to just sort of trust your gut and trust what you're seeing and try and put all those pieces together. And it kind of doesn't matter what I think because I'm not the one making the pick. So the question of who would I pick versus what do I think the Browns would do are two completely different answers. So, I think it just makes sense. Like sometimes, Ashley, because this process is so long, you just talk yourself in circles and you just go around and it's like, you know what? Maybe they should take this guy at number 2, or maybe they should trade back, or maybe they should do this. And sometimes it is like, just don't overthink this. Like you've been thinking this, you get to draft night, they do something and you realize, oh, you know what? It actually was what I thought it was going to be way back in like December or January, as opposed to all these different things I've talked myself into.
Yeah, I'm getting that vibe because I feel like it's almost like the stages of grief that I have gone through. I mean, early on, I was like, just trade the pick, just get out of it. And then I was all aboard the Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter train. And I will say, after the combine, I don't know about you guys, and I know everyone says, oh, the foot is nothing to worry about with Carter. That's all well and good, but it scares me. And again, it doesn't matter what I think about it, but I do just think when you're picking at 2, if you're not taking a quarterback, you better be 1000% sure that there is nothing wrong with that guy and he's going to contribute right away. So I got off of that and then I'm like, okay, Shador. But then I'm like, oh, Jackson Dart's stock is rising. I don't know. And then I hear Jalen Milroe talk at the combine and I'm like, oh, wow. Jalen Milroe, there are some things to like there, even though he's getting kind of a bad rap and Alabama fans are happy he's gone. I've gone in circles and I'm like, at the end of the day, but here's the funny thing about it. If we're sitting there on April 24th and with the second pick, they take Shador Sanders, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, well, of course. But if we're also sitting there on April 24th and with the second pick, they take Travis Hunter, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, like why didn't I just assume this is what they were going to do from the beginning? Like I can still see that reality, but it is funny the first time going through this and going through a true quarterback search to be like, wow, it's almost like every week I'm thinking of a different scenario and why it would be plausible, but it also just won't surprise me if Shador Sanders is a Cleveland Brown at the end of all of this too.
Yeah, I mean that's just sometimes it really does just come back to like what have you felt all along? Like what has it felt like from day one? And that doesn't necessarily mean that's what it's going to be, but like again, we've been through this enough to realize sometimes that gut feeling, that initial gut feeling is maybe what you should have stuck with. So there's another point here and we get pushback sometimes when, some people on Twitter were talking about, because Mary Kay, you and I have talked about this idea of recovering from a miss at quarterback is easier to do than it's ever been. And we got a little pushback on Twitter from some people I happen to notice in my mentions. And I do want to say, like, I don't think we're saying it's easy. I don't think it's saying that missing at quarterback, like, it's no big deal. You just shrug it off and you're fine. The point we're making is this isn't like Tim Couch when you brought him in and gave him this huge contract. Nowadays, if we were still under that old system, you draft a guy and have to pay him $200 million like right away. That's not how it works anymore. You can move on from guys quicker. And yes, it sets you back to miss on that pick, but it's still easier to recover from that and fix it. So I feel like there's this movement that's starting to happen nationally that we've been talking about here for a while. This opportunity to pick at number 2, how rare that is, and the chance to maybe fix your quarterback problem. And with this Deshaun Watson contract lingering and your cap, I know the Browns manage the cap and they finagle things, but it's still difficult. Adding a young rookie at number 2 on a rookie contract is really valuable. And I was just thinking about this draft. Like, you look at the difference between just the number 2 pick and the number 6 pick. It's not that many wins. Like, all it takes is 1 or 2 stupid wins next year. Even if you think the Browns are going to be terrible next year and get the number 1 pick, all it takes is like 2 stupid wins to turn that number 1 pick into like the number 4 pick. And that changes your outlook completely. Ask the Patriots about that. The Browns were a snowy win over Pittsburgh away from the number 1 pick. So, it really is that thin of a line. So again, I think the opportunity to pick at number 2 has to be part of this discussion when you're talking about quarterback versus other positions.
Absolutely, 100%. And I am sticking to my guns on the notion that it is not catastrophic if you whiff on your quarterback at number 2 overall. It's not going to kill you. It's not a death sentence. It's not 10 years of purgatory. It's just not that anymore. You can come back from it. So many teams have already done that. But I'm going to throw something out there. And I would so do this in a heartbeat that you guys are going to think I am insane and that I've lost my mind. But I'm going to do it. And I feel so strongly about it right now that I absolutely 100% think that they should do this. And our listeners are also going to think that I'm nuts, but I'm doing it. Okay. I'm putting on my GM cap today and I'm going to make a trade. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm taking Shador at number 2. I'm going to do the obvious right thing there. I'm going to take Shador and I'm going to roll with it and see how it goes. But then I'm trading back into the end of the 1st round with my 2nd round pick and some other things. And I'm taking Tyler Shuck in the 1st round. I'm taking 2 quarterbacks in the 1st round. Okay. 2 in the 1st round. Crazy as it sounds, if Shador, for whatever reason, isn't exactly what you thought he was going to be, then you have someone else that you can develop and try there. And he's getting so much buzz. I'm going to be writing about this at some point this week. He's getting so much buzz and so much run lately. And I watched him at the Senior Bowl. He's huge. He's good. And I'm totally intrigued by him. So in my mind, that's a win-win situation. You cannot lose by doing this. You cannot lose. You get the guy that everybody thinks should go at number 2, and then you get the it guy. And if you find yourself with 2 amazing quarterbacks, then trade one of them at some point. Develop and trade. I'm doing it. What else do you need so badly in the 1st round or with that number 33 pick that you cannot do this? I'm doing it.
There are moments sometimes when I wish that we could just have Doug Maurice like jump on the Zoom just to watch his head explode. Because listen, I love the theory. I don't agree with it. I wouldn't do it. I actually think that number 33 pick is valuable to, the 33, those picks on day 2 are going to be really valuable to add a really good edge rusher, a really good receiver. Maybe you can find a safety in there. I think you can add, I mean, it's asking a lot with 4 picks, but I think you could potentially add 3 starters with those picks. So you could get your quarterback at 2, and then you could add 3 starters maybe on day 2, or at least 3 guys who should be able to come in and compete for jobs right away and be starters within the first 2 years of their career. So I would do that. So I'm all on board with drafting a guy at 2, even in a class where you might have questions. Even with a guy like Shedeur that I have some questions about, I would still take that chance. I can't get on board with you for the idea of trading up. And I actually like Tyler Shook. I like what I've seen out of him, but I can't get on board with trading up to take 2 quarterbacks in the first round.
Well, think about it for a while. Think about it for a while, Dan.
I'll sleep on it.
Let it
We'll
marinate.
See. Maybe I'll wake up in the morning and be like, you know what? Let's just draft all quarterbacks. Let's build the whole plane out of quarterbacks.
Let's do it.
Ashley, you got to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I cannot get on board with this idea yet. Actually, while Mary Kay was talking about it, was funny. Paulinka was next to me. He sat up. He was very alert while Mary Kay was talking. He can't hear, but I think he could sense it. He has ESP, much like Mary Kay, or ESPN. And as soon as Dan started talking, he laid back down and calmed down. So I also think Paulinka's not on board. But it's basically for what Dan said. I think at that point, I want another starter there for sure, like a surefire starter. And I'm just so interested in this D-line class, not just edge rushers, this D-line class. I think they still need help there. They still need to get younger on that D-line. I think you can benefit from having somebody else there. Dan, who's that? Didn't you have them taking the A&M kid in your one mock draft, in your first mock draft with 33? Did you have them taking him?
No, I hadn't.
Or was it somebody else?
I hadn't taken the Boston College.
Okay.
I can never say his name. Donovan Ezerica, I think is his name. And then I had Landon Donovan from Arkansas in another one.
Nick Scorton.
But I know
who I'm
I think
thinking
you're talking
of.
about
Scorton.
Maybe
I don't know how to say his last name.
Maybe I did because I like him too. But yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, another possible Texas A&M edge rusher. That's not a bad thing. So I'm not opposed to the idea of taking 2 quarterbacks, but I don't want them to stray with their second pick and do that. That would be madness. We'd have so much to write though that maybe we should root for that to happen just because of all the content we'll be able to produce.
So I misspoke. They have 3 day 2 picks and then a 4th pick right off the top. They have the 2nd pick in the 4th round on day 3. So just to clean that up a little bit. But that, Mary Kay, that would be my argument against it, is this idea of, man, and look, it's a big ask because Andrew Berry has struggled especially in that 3rd round at times. So it's a big ask, but this could be like what you want this to be is your Detroit Lions draft, where they got Jahmyr Gibbs and Brian Branch, and just, they got like a bunch of starters just on those first couple of days. Now they already had their quarterback in place, but I feel like the Browns have that opportunity in front of them. Oh, wait. Sorry. All right, go ahead.
They do. And this is obviously a very unorthodox, out there thing that I'm proposing. But I sort of feel like you can almost find anything else you need somewhere else. You can trade for somebody. You can sign one in free agency. Now, they didn't go out and go nuts in free agency. So it's not like we can sit here and say, oh, geez, they're so set at wide receiver now. You know what I mean? Or they're so set at edge rusher now. Although they did bring in an edge rusher in Joe Tryon Shoinka. Did I say that right?
You nailed it.
I did?
Yeah.
Woohoo. So, they did not add a whole bunch of free agents where we could say, oh, geez, they have a surplus here and there and here and there. So I totally understand what you guys are saying. You would much rather have one of those amazing running backs, although I still feel like 2nd round seems high to me for a running back, but maybe not in this class.
This is my draft take. This is a guy you saw at the Senior Bowl, I think, Mary Kay. I really like Trevor Etienne. I think he's I think there's some day 3 guys at running back
Yes.
That's my draft analyst. Me putting on my draft analyst hat for the day.
Yeah. So, but I do think it's deep enough at running back that you might be able to get one in the 3rd round. Maybe you trade around a little bit with some of your picks and figure some things out that way. I don't know. I just feel like the hardest thing to nail down is the quarterback. And if you think I've been saying for months that I think they should take 2, they probably won't do that. This is my own crazy idea. They probably will not do it. But if I'm going to do it, I'm going for the gusto. I'm going footballs to the wall on the second quarterback thing. And I'm going to aim for the stars and go for one that actually might turn out to just be, who knows, the best quarterback in this class. It could happen. It could possibly happen. So I'm doing that. And then I'm going to find some of my other gems somewhere else, either in the draft or in free agency or in a trade.
You know what, though? I don't agree, but I love it. Draft season is boring. Everybody just says the same stuff all the time. Like, I love it. Be bold. Go
Right?
out there.
Why not?
Hey, and look, let's say they did that. Let's say they actually did that, and they spent all of draft night just getting killed for it. And then the second quarterback they draft turns into like Tom Brady or something. Like, well, guess what? And that's the other thing about this whole thing. Like, sometimes you're going to make a pick and you're going to get the Atlanta Falcons, for example. You're going to make a pick and you're going to get killed for it by all the talking heads on TV. But then guess what happens a year later? So, yeah, that was a pretty smart pick by those guys. So sometimes you just have to do things like that everybody kills and everybody makes fun of you for, and you're the main character on Twitter for the night. But if it works out in the end, you get the last laugh.
Well, the funny part about this whole thing is back, let's say 10, 12, 15, 16 years ago, not every fan in America had a voice in what you did. Now, there's immediate reaction, not just by fans, but everybody in the world. So you do run the risk of just getting slammed all over social media right away. But who cares? Who cares? I mean, that just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that everybody will hate that. It doesn't matter that I'm going to get ridiculed for my idea. I don't care. Part of that is because I have a thick skin. Part of that is because, for the most part, I don't read those comments and I don't read those reactions. But the other thing is, like I said, and like you just said, be bold. Go for the gusto sometimes.
Okay, there we go. Mary Kay brought it strong here at the end of our Monday edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. That'll do it for this edition of the podcast. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, make sure you're following us on YouTube, Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. On Instagram, it's Orange and Brown Talk. On Twitter, it's Orange Brown Talk. I know, a little different, a little confusing. Sometimes that's how it goes, but follow us there as well on Twitter. I don't know our full schedule this week yet. Ashley and I are actually going to be covering the NCAA tournament a little later this week, so we might be a little light on pods, but we'll get you everything you need this week for sure, including a Hey and K at some point before the end of the week. For Mary Kay and Ashley, I'm Dan. Thanks for listening, everybody.